nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
Nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Brethren in Christ, Laudetur Jesus Christus.
In secula.
In
This is
secula.
Timothy Flanders with the meaning of Catholic. Jesus is King. Welcome to the Monday Morning Man Show. It's the terror of demons with co-host and author of the book, Kennedy Hall, and Luis Medina. Luis, how you doing, brother?
Hey, brothers, how are you? Glad to be here.
Yes, it's been not the same without you for a bit. Luis Medina is the host of the RECONQUISTA network. Tell us what's going on with RECONQUISTA.
Oh my goodness! As y'all know, it's been very busy. First of all, I'm rebuilding my life, as you know, little by little. So everything's going together with families, new challenges and all that. So it's very exciting. And then also the channel has more lineup now, like weekly, constantly shows in Spanish, different topics. Like I usually focus on politics and religion, especially U.S. policy. Now we're talking about health too, like added to the lineup, and just a bunch of stuff. It's doing well. And now we also have a show about political life in Mexico, which usually I always focus on the U.S., but there's a guy from Mexico that talks Mexican policy, and apparently they love it. So it's one of my most popular shows in Reconquista. And we're hoping to be back in Meaning of Catholic this fall with more content. And life is good, man. Just, looking forward.
Excellent. So, yeah, be sure to support Luis at patreon.com/Reconquista Network. That's the address, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So please support Luis. He is rebuilding his life. He's got a new family coming, and he needs your support. So please,
prayers, particularly rosaries. Yeah.
So what's going on with Mexico? We talk a lot about U.S. We talk a lot about Canada, but we're missing the heart of the Americas, which is Mexico. Our Lady of Guadalupe, of course. So what's new with Mexico? What are the Masons doing in Mexico these days?
Oh my goodness, they're having a heyday in some parts of the country. Politically speaking, apparently there's a lot of impunity going on down there with this new government. Literally organized crime runs like rampant and completely unchecked. A lot of things have changed. Usually we talk about like old paradigms, even when it comes to in the US, for example, domestically migration. We used to think about like your typical non-politically correct, but a lot of Hispanics coming to the US and work and all that. It's a whole different game, man. Now it's just like now it's not. We're not talking about like Mexicans going to work at the fields or hard jobs kind of thing. We see people in Mexico that we don't know how they got there. It's literally like from far parts of the world, and a lot of the issues we see in the U.S. and maybe in Canada or maybe in like Europe, we're starting seeing Mexico with violence, and it's just. Let me put it this way, actually. We're seeing an influx of non-Trinitarian peoples in Mexico. Because when you have, in the U.S. and Mexico, you have Hispanic assimilating eventually, and it's just part of the culture. It has helped us demographically here in the U.S. I can't speak for Canada. But at the end of the day, you're talking about two, cultures that have a Trinitarian worldview. Whether one is Protestant and the other one's Catholic, it's still a Trinitarian view. Now we have people just like Europe with Muslims. Mexico, you're getting all sorts of people trying to get to the U.S. and staying in Mexico. So it's causing a lot of issues, and organized crime is expanding, and this government is winking at socialism quite hardly. So it's a lot going on down there.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that the back when the communists took over Mexico the first time in like under Calles, 1920 or so, and then the Cristero Wars and all that. There were still persecutions happening, and the laws were still on the books till like 1990 or something like that, if I recall.
Yeah. They were not enforced.
So are they going back to some sort of other form of communism? What's their new tactic? Is this like a George Soros operation? He's bringing in a bunch of Mohammedans or whatever. How do you see the enemies of Christ or the oligarchs working in Mexico?
What a great question. And if I can expand to that question, and I'll answer in a second, is this gives us a glimpse of how globally the left or liberalism or whatever you want to call it, anything that goes against the grain of Christianity acts. They act. They have a global value system, but they act locally. And often we on the right or conservative use it the opposite way. We think too much locally, but try to act globally. And well, Mexico's a prime example of what's going on with this global elites, if you want to put it that way, because you have a government that denounces, capitalism or whatever seems to be like patriotic, in that sense, as we know it here in America or even in Canada. It's a government that is very left-leaning, unfortunately, very socialist-leaning, but at the same time, they send envoys to the World Economic Forum, kind of like same thing with Putin. Putin supposedly this, opponent to the West, yet he talks to Klaus Schwab. This just doesn't make any sense. Obviously, it's all the same game, just different teams. Just like saying I like the Cowboys and I like the Broncos or whatever. It's the same league as the NFL. Well, we see something like that in Mexico. It's just a different team. And what they're trying to do is it looks like, because I don't want to accuse them, but the ambassador has raised these concerns. Senators here in the U.S. have raised concerns in Capitol Hill that the government seems to actively be cooperating with organized crime, particularly like the drug dealers. And these guys are branching out into different areas like, agriculture, black market. They're even making deals with China, selling stuff like raw materials, things like that. So in Mexico, essentially the government, not the people, the government, they're just not caring. They're just winking at it. And it's been interesting, obviously, down there. Unfortunately, some states, just like in the U.S., I don't know about the provinces in Canada because I'm not very familiar with how the political system works up there. But some states have kind of shifted towards the right and some to the left. Abortion has become a big issue down there, too. Mexico, statistically speaking, is one of the top 3 countries that abort the least, despite the fact that it's legal in some states. It's still it's just culturally speaking very stigmatized, as it should. And you and I know how it's going on here in the U.S. Well, it's stigmatized down there. Some states have pushed for it. My hometown is in the conservative side. Some former Cristero areas are still very conservative. And some states in the south and the center of the country have become very liberal. So it's just, in some ways, it's a reflection of what's going on here in the U.S. Mainstream media down there is literally just regurgitating what the U.S. mainstream media says. So there's no news there.
So the Mexican government, well, Mexico has had a anti-Catholic government on and off at least since 1810.
Oh, yeah.
With the Masonic takeover then. But it's been an anti-Catholic government, but a strongly Catholic people. And Kennedy, we had a comment from our friend Andrea, and he says, I guess Mexico is similar to Italy. Organized crime and the state connected to the mafia crush normal people trying to survive in the anti-Christian, anti-Christic, hellish world. And so Italy has also had an anti-Catholic government since 1870, at least, on and off, with a strongly Catholic people under it. Any comments on the similarities there, Kennedy? Between Italy and Mexico, you mean? In the sort of the anti-Catholic government versus the Catholic people. Yeah. So I lived in Italy in 2002, 2001, 2002, and it's been 20 years. Goodness gracious, I'm getting old. But at that time, you could not go into a variety store, convenience store. Do you guys call them a convenience store or a variety store?
Convenience. I mean, like the gas station?
Like the corner store.
Yeah.
We call it a variety store.
We call it a convenience store, I'd say.
Yeah, at least we're in Texas.
It's okay. You guys are wrong. It's fine. But so at the variety store, like on the outside, on the window, like on the store window where you can see all the flyers and advertisements and stuff, there would be like a fully naked pornographic image, like the cover of a Playboy magazine, like just fully. That was in Italy in 2002. Berlusconi, who was
El Caballero.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of like, I mean, this is a crude analogy, sort of like a Trump of Italy, insofar as he was a media mogul who became a president. He did two things that were very strange. One, he totally destroyed Italy's internet development. So to this day, Italy has like terrible internet relative to the rest of the world. You can still get decent connection in your home and stuff, but he was a TV media mogul, so he really put a stranglehold on the development of non-traditional media communications. And then, but he also put hardcore pornography on TV at like 10 p.m.
Wow.
Like there was only like, when I lived there, there were like 3 channels, like Rite, so the NPR or whatever of Italy, and there was Rai Uno, Rai Due, Rai Tre, and then there was 4 or 5 channels that like he bought. Eventually, he brought in satellite. But the point I'm making here is the people themselves have these ancient Catholic traditions. They're very much lost, sadly. But then the government is like this opportunistic, literally porn pushing thing. But that seems to be the case. It's always been in Italy. I mean, Tim, you can elaborate on this more. Like, we have the pornocracy in Rome. So I was doing a live stream last night. There's rumors that Pope Francis is resigning, and they're actually pretty substantiated rumors. They're not like from my journalism spidey senses are tingling, because it's the Associated Press and Reuters and places like that who are they're leftists, but they don't report things unless they're substantiated for reasons of journalistic. They'll spin it to be a lie, but the fact that they'll use usually is true. So they're talking about Pope Francis resigning in August and whatever, and people were asking in the comments, oh my goodness, who's going to be Pope and how are we going to fix this or whatever? And I said, there was a pornocracy in the papacy for how long? How long was that, Tim? And when that was the case?
Well, it's different ways to date it, but like the very first pornocracy was like 960 to 1000 or so, but then it was like in the 1000s that it really got cleaned up. So maybe, but I mean, you look at that years,
and you're probably looking at that and you're going, how are we ever going to have a moral hierarchy again? But then somehow it just sort of happens. So Italy's a mess. And then Canada sounds like Mexico, except we just changed laws to make all the crime legal.
I mean, literally, Kennedy, the president down there,
got rid of the crime, right?
It's incredible resemblance between sometimes Trudeau and López Obrador, which López Obrador, I don't know if you heard this or not. This is irrelevant for the daily lives of Mexicans, but still made it the news. He demanded an apology from Spain for the conquest or whatever it is. So he's playing this like indigenous brand who literally, I can't think of any guy who has a more Spanish name than maybe Cortez, other than
Spanish?
That.
Did he speak Spanish?
He demanded in Spanish, by the way. And they also demanded the Pope to apologize in the name of the Catholic Church. He's just playing this whole like indigenous nonsense. We are seeing also a shift in mentality, because when I started Reconquista, there's a lot of this whole I always like fought against this term, the Anglosphere, the Anglo world. And I kind of touched the nerve, because I say, hold on, let's look at the facts, because they say, well, U.S. is part of the Anglosphere. Like, hold on, maybe linguistically speaking, but like, biggest commercial partner, like, economic partners, Mexico, and Canada to that. Like, there's like different facts, like the actions don't match the states, man. So I bring that up, and there's a lot of resistance. But my point of that saying is, whether we like it or not, the U.S. is the epicenter with all its flaws that we have here, which we have plenty. But we're the epicenter right now of the resistance for this globalist agenda, whatever you want to call it, just for the sake of not getting banned or flag in YouTube. But the enemy and how it operates, and the resources they have, and the methods and the experiments they do, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We can discuss that on Twitter or Telegram, whatever. But my point is, who they are, what their intentions are, and how they see you. Well, the only actual resistance you find it both in politics and spiritually speaking is coming from the U.S. And one of the points I was making originally is, we're proud of being the land of Our Lady of Guadalupe. It's an honor, obviously. It's something that it was just given to you, it's chosen. We didn't merit that thing. But we forget often that it's the U.S. also the country that is consecrated to the Immaculate Heart, just like Spain. There's a similarity there. And at the end of the day, this is Our Lady's land, America, and she's reclaiming what belongs to her. And we're seeing that also all the way down to Mexico. And I'm a firm believer that, and that's what I plead to my Hispanic friends is, if you want your country to survive spiritually and not just politically, then your vested interest is in the what happens in the U.S. And let me give you a prime example with the abortion debate. China expanded the whole abortion to 2-child. I think they're in 3 kids now for a while, like policy, because obviously they are in a demographic decline, big one. So is Russia and all those things. Nobody batted an eye. I mean, everybody just like, okay, yeah, whatever. The U.S., we saw what happened about a month or 2 ago with the supposedly leaked document. Everybody's in uproar. Why? Because what happens here matters everywhere, not because we're great or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter. The fact is, this is it. And this is where Catholicism is actually flourishing. So this is what we need to, this is the cultural war here in the U.S. And we need to just wake up and smell the coffee and leave old paradigms behind and unite. And so personally, I finally start seeing some change in attitudes and mentality in the Hispanic world. So I'm pretty excited about it, though.
Excellent. I reminds me of one of my favorite lines in Terror of Demons. It's when Kennedy says, "Wake up and smell the sulfur," because we don't want to go to hell. I wanted to let's talk about Pope Francis. I wanted to mention it is Whitmonday. I want to break out the Liturgy of the Home calendar. It is the Pentecost Octave this week. Pentecost is the 3rd greatest feast of the year. We have Easter is number 1, Christmas is number 2, and Pentecost is number 3. And so I didn't know this, but I just learned recently that all the readings of the Pentecost Octave correspond to the 7 sacraments. And so there's every day of the octave there's particular readings. And what's interesting is that on this day, on Whitmonday, Pope Francis instituted the feast of Mary, Mother of the Church. Now, in the new calendar, the octave of Pentecost was done away with, unfortunately. So this would be the first day of ordinary time, or that term is terrible. The actual Latin term is tempus per annum, time throughout the year. But for some reason, they really wanted to make it ordinary time instead. But Pope Francis instituted this feast, Mary Mother Church, on Whitmonday, Monday after Pentecost, as they call it. And this feast has an interesting history, because there was, at Vatican II, there was a whole document on Mary, the Mother of God. And because of the pressure from progressivist forces or ressourcement theologians or various factors, they relegated Our Lady to a final chapter in Lumen Gentium. And so there was a strong pressure from Protestant-friendly people at the council to really suppress Our Lady and put her away. And one of the things was a proclamation of her as Mary, Mother of the Church. And shout out to Spain. The Spanish bishops were not having this at all. They were all about Our Lady. They hated the fact that the Northern European bishops wanted to suppress Our Lady. But what happened was Paul VI, in one of his moments of brilliance, there are a few of those, I think, Paul VI decided to proclaim Our Lady as Mother of the Church as a title. Even though they had fought against him and all this stuff, they said he's gonna do it anyways. So that was a good moment. That's what the German Rhine group calls Black Week. That was a week where they did not really like what happened at Vatican II, and one of the things was Mary, Mother of the Church. And so Our Lady had her way anyways, and we ultimately see Pope Francis instituting this feast, Mary, Mother of the Church. It's a great title. I'm really happy that this feast is instituted. Even it's kind of like a remnant of the Octave of Pentecost, because it is something that happens associated with Pentecost, Monday after Pentecost. So Mary, Mother of the Church, it's so there's one of there's a number of things that I really have been thankful for Pope Francis in his pontificate. And this is one of them. So it's a wonderful feast to remember that Our Lady is the Mother of the Church. Like Kennedy, you were talking about the pornocracy, the corruption in the church, but that Our Lady is the Mother of the Church, and she will have her way, as she did in this feast day, even if the machinations of evil men try to overcome her own glory and her own efforts. Just like Our Lady of Guadalupe, they really can't stamp out Our Lady. She's gonna have her way either way. So, and there's other great things about Pope Francis's pontificate. I was thinking of when in the twilight of Pope Francis's pontificate, I wanted to write 2 articles. One was saying Pope Francis's pontificate, is it the worst in the history of the church? ? And then we could compare it with other bad pontificates. But then we could also say, here's some wonderful things that we should be thankful for that Pope Francis did. And there's a number of significant things. But Kennedy, I want to get your comments. Can you tell us more about this resignation quasi-substantiated rumor?
Yeah. So, and I'll add here, I agree. That some of the good things in Francis' pontificate, it's weirdly been very good for folks that go to the SSPX. And somehow he's allowed Bishop Schneider to flourish. I don't understand that. So that's been great. And I'll also say, I've said this, I believe the consecration was done validly, finally. And that's one of the, if that's the case, that's literally one of the most important things in church history. It cannot be underestimated. And I was researching last night or a couple of days ago, because I did a video on Thursday or Friday addressing the idea of, people will say, well, if the consecration was valid, why hasn't everything happened yet, sort of thing. And, there's nothing in the Revelations that says it would happen quickly. It just says there'd be a promise if it was done. So that's pretty easy to answer. But nonetheless, I was looking at, what would it mean for Russia to convert? And I remember, and I'm sort of banging my head against the wall, being like, what would that look like? And I thought, it's actually very simple. It would just mean that Russia would unite with Rome. Like, that's all that means. It doesn't mean that every Russian on earth becomes a pious Catholic, because that's against free will, and that's impossible. It's not as if God can wave a magic wand and all of a sudden all the Russians wake up and they're pious Catholics or something. It has to be through providence and steps in people's lives and that sort of thing. And then I thought, wow, Pope Francis was like the first Pope in forever to meet with the Patriarch of Russia in 2015 in Havana. And one of the things they discussed there was the conflict in Ukraine and the schism within the Russian Orthodox and Greek Orthodox Church, and a way to seek unity between them, which is very strange. Why would the Pope be concerned with that? Whatever. And people underestimate just how, this, Tim, from being former Eastern Orthodox, like a Russian Orthodox and a Catholic getting in the same room and breathing the same air is a big deal. Let alone signing a document together and embracing each other as brothers. And that's a strange thing that happened under Francis. And it was kind of I looked at it and I went, wow, that's one of those dots you connect when you look back and you go, oh, Francis was the Pope of Fatima in a weird way with Russia and the Catholic Church. And we didn't even know it, anyway.
Yeah. Just a side note, let me just add to that real quick. So basically there was an official sort of corporate dialogue seeking unity between the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox churches all together. But because of the conflict between Russia and the Greeks,
yes,
that whole thing has stalled since the 1990s or the early 2000s, because the Russians were debating with the Greeks in front of the Catholics, and the Russians left because they were angry at the Greeks. And so this internal schism between the Orthodox is actually stopping any sort of unity with Rome. Yeah. So this is very significant.
And also, let's be honest. If Russia is 80% or something like that of Orthodox Christians, or 60%, it's a big number of because there's about 300 million Orthodox Christians.
Yeah, it's like Russia is more than all the rest of them combined.
That's right. So the Patriarch of Constantinople symbolically is obviously a very big deal, but he accounts for 300,000 in his communion or something like that versus Russia,
Moscow.
Moscow. But Pope Francis' resignation. So I did after this video, people can watch the stream. I go a little more in depth, but basically, just before Benedict resigned, he went to the tomb of Saint Celestine V, who was the last pope to resign about 400 years ago or whatever, 500 years ago, and that was symbolic because Providence is in charge, and all these little symbols. This is why they always put feast days and things like that on their letters. It matters when they publish things and do things, and he went there, and soon after that, Pope Benedict resigned, joining Saint Celestine as a pope who had resigned. His was under different auspices than Benedict, but nonetheless. And then Pope Francis has been getting visibly more ill recently. He's in a wheelchair. He has diabetes. He has one of those insulin monitors and things. I mean, he's 85 years old. He's an old Italian man, and he has diabetes. So, I mean, you get past that 80-year-old mark, and everything after that is basically borrowed time. And so, if Francis didn't have the doctors he has, he probably wouldn't be alive still. If you think about how the medical care, he probably has daily checkups and things like that. And so, in any case, he just made the cardinals. He made 20 or announced 21 of them. Not all of them are voting age. One has to actually look at that. Only of the 130 cardinals or so, about 80 or so are voting age that Francis has appointed. A lot of the ones he's appointed are not voting age, so they're more of symbolic. But so he made a commitment to go visit the tomb of Saint Celestine V in August, around the time that he does the cardinals, cardinalate thing. Now, here's the thing: no one works in August in Italy. Like, no one works in August. Like, not even the church works in August in Italy. It's oppressively hot. In Rome, especially in August, like, it's unbelievable. It's like 42. I mean, whatever in Celsius, it's about 42 degrees.
102.
It's something like that. It's really, really hot. Nobody works, and especially in Rome. So, why would he do this in August? It's very strange. So, it's making everyone come back to work in the middle of August, people forget too. Like, the Vatican is a nation state. It's not just a place with the church. It's an actual nation state. They have a press corps. They have all these things. The fact that, because there have been rumors about his resignation before, in like blogs, Pillar Catholic, or some blog, whatever.com, like saying, oh, Pope Francis is having surgery. Might this be his resignation? Things like that. But this comes out in LA Times, Reuters, Associated Press, NPR, and it's sources say whatever, which always means it's a leak. It always means it's someone from the press corps that needs this message to get out because of some political reason, is letting people know to prepare them for something that's coming. That's what it means from a journalistic perspective. And then I remember reading an interview from Francis in 2015. It was for the Mexican Televisa. It was a Mexican thing, and he said, I don't think my pontificate is going to be very long. And he said, what Benedict did is it should not be seen as an exception, but an institution. So basically the new normal. So, because Francis is very much utilitarian in some ways. So Benedict resigned because he could no longer fulfill the office with vigor and zeal and whatever. And Francis has said since the beginning of his pontificate that when he is no longer useful as an administrator, then he would resign because he views that as more beneficial to the church. So as he gets really ill, as the COVID hypnosis is wearing off around the world, he's in a wheelchair now a lot of the time to get around. I think he's just going to do what he said he would do.
Interesting. I know that I believe that Cardinal Ratzinger made some comments. I think it may have been when Paul VI was rumored to be resigning, but I think he made some comments about Pius XII's pontificate and how he was older and sick or whatever, and because people are living so much longer, Cardinal Ratzinger said something like maybe there should be a resignation because you just can't function when you're really, really old and you just kind of modern medicine is just sort of keeping you alive, sort of thing. It's not really something where you're governing anymore. It's just your bureaucracy keeping the momentum going for how many years, and then what can happen to the church at that point. So I thought that was if I'm remembering his comment correctly, it seems like an astute observation. So Luis, what are your thoughts on that? Any thoughts?
Oh yeah, there are many actually points that I would like to expand on a lot. First of all, I can't help to notice the contrast attitude. Let's assume this is happening, like just for the sake of the argument, what Kennedy was bringing up about resignation. I grew up, I don't know you guys, I'm from the generation of St. John Paul II, so we saw him go to the bitter end, and that's kind of the frame view that I was formed, basically, as you go until there's nothing left in you, like completely juiced out. And I'm not saying that Pope Francis or Pope Benedict, they're wrong, or Pope Francis, if he were to resign, he was wrong. It's just I'm not used to that. The other thing is, talking about Pope Francis, a couple of months ago in Spanish, I tweeted something that was a little controversial too. And I didn't think it was controversial. Just like Kennedy was seeing some of the good things that have happened in this pontificate, and I listed it. One of those, obviously, the meeting with the Patriarch Kirill in Cuba, that was a big deal. And I noticed, because at that time I was still going to a Protestant seminary, and nobody talked about that. And to me, it was like, at that moment, thinking, hold on, whether we agree with or not with Catholicism, that's one thing. This is a big deal, just like historically speaking, the one in Cuba. Why nobody is really paying attention to this? Well, that was one thing. But the other thing I mentioned is, as you know, my first name, like half of the Mexican boys, is Joseph. Saint Joseph, my favorite saint. I'm consecrated to Saint Joseph, by the way. So when he declared the year of Saint Joseph, that was a big deal to me. I think that was one of the greatest moments in his pontificate. Also, the year of mercy. That's a great year. I know literally people who were influenced by that year and converted to Catholicism. That's a big deal. The adding of Saint Joseph to the liturgy, that was another big important just win for the Pope. So I started listing all those things in order, and some people didn't really like it. Obviously, the consecration of Russia, the travel to Iraq, all these historical moments that were great. Does that mean that everything obviously Pope Francis has done is great? Absolutely not. And also, I always keep in mind is, maybe it's my Hispanic upbringing. I don't know, but I tend to view the papacy a little bit with more like, I don't know what the right word is. I don't want to say respect, maybe with a little more fear and trembling, since it's not necessarily, Mexicans have this common thing is we have the church, we have the Pope. That's just what we know, because government sucks down there. So it's like, okay, but at least we have a Pope and we have the church. So we tend to respect the papacy a little bit more, or be afraid of it, whatever you want to put it. So it's hard for me, all that to say, it's hard for me to be harshly critical and kind of making a character judgment of Pope Francis, because I don't know what goes on in his mind and his heart. Clearly, there's some concerns. Clearly, he gets along with people who are very questionable. Then again, I don't know what he goes through in his daily basis. The other thing I want to touch or mention is, with this pontificate, is how it really reflects on what our mission is as the body. Earlier you were talking about Vatican II, the church, and Our Lady, and all these titles. And that for me is just a given. But talking to some Europeans, that's when I learned that we have a different upbringing, even though we're both Catholics. Talking to some Northern Europeans, apparently Our Lady, although obviously is revered and loved, it's not as, how can I put it, as prominent in the cultural Catholicism of up there in that part of the world. So I realized that, in other words, the ethos of being Hispanic really is, we mentioned this before, is strongly Marian, strongly pro-family, and subsidiary. And it's not even about our language, or in other words, you can be Hispanic and speak Catalonian, Italian, indigenous tongues. It doesn't matter. You're still Hispanic. What makes or breaks a Hispanic essence is Mary at the end of the day. And to learn that that is a struggle for other cultures or religions, that was a shocking revelation to me. So when people asked, why were you, converted back to Catholicism and not Orthodoxy, and not that the Orthodox don't love Our Lady, it's just that, or, high Anglicanism or whatever, it's like, it's Our Lady. I mean, to me makes the most sense, the way our church defines and defends Our Lady. Everybody can have the same liturgy, everybody can be reverent, and they can have the bells and smells and all the incense you want, which I love, and whatever, even Latin if you want to. But the prominence of Our Lady in our daily life there as the intermediate, intercessor, it's only found in Catholicism, and what's kind of like the deal breaker for me. It's like, yeah, this is it. This is where it's at, and obviously I never looked back ever since. But anyway, and it's all through thanks to the church, who at the end of the day, at the 11th hour, has always come forward and done the right thing. Even though despite all odds. So here we are.
Absolutely. I think of two things that I'll say on behalf of Pope Francis. They're both really controversial. The first one is Pius X made a big error in a document called AS Semper, which is where he suppressed the Eastern Catholics of the United States from ordaining married men. And so the United States Eastern Catholics have had to ordain celibate men for 100 years or so because of Pius X. Pius X essentially sided with some Irish bishops who were kind of just prejudiced against married men being ordained. Eastern and Western rites, no priest can get married. If you're ordained, you can't get married. But the form of the matter of the sacrament does not include the fact that the man has to be celibate to be ordained. And that's something that goes back to the Council of Nicaea. They were actually talking about this way back then, and they decided to not impose celibacy on all priests. It ended up being a discipline in the West due to the first pornocracy in particular, because there were such problems with bad priests. But in the East, there became this stability of married men being ordained for parish priesthood. So that I think that was a very serious prudential error on the part of Pius X, and it actually provoked, they say, tens of thousands of Eastern Catholics to leave the Catholic Church and become Eastern Orthodox because of this issue. That's what they say, based on a figure known as Alexis Toth in the United States. So that's something that Pope Francis has reversed. So he reversed that 100 years later or so. And that has allowed many worthy men who are in Eastern Catholicism to be ordained. Now, it's also a provocation. It was a provocation for the Eastern Orthodox, the fact that the Pope was doing this to an ancient custom that goes back centuries and centuries and centuries, because the Eastern Orthodox would say, hey, well, why should we unite with Rome? You're not going to respect our customs and our traditions. You're going to impose your Latin customs on us. So I am very thankful that Pope Francis reversed that. I think, that's controversial because Pius X is kind of like the hero pope of the 20th century. But the fact of the matter is, I think that even the saintly popes, even Pius X, who's an incorrupt saint, can make some errors because the popes have a massive bureaucracy, and they have to rely on basically people trying to give them information. They have to trust this person, not this person. It's a very difficult job. So, you can make mistakes, but still be a saint. So Pope Francis reversed that. I think that was a great, very, very great thing. And let's see. JJ says, on that note, Jojo says, so would you be in favor of married priests in the Latin Rite? If not in the Latin Rite, then why not? Well, first of all, it's an established custom in the East, so I think that should not be questioned. And as far as the West, I did a whole show on this back when they were pushing it. So there's a couple of factors here. One, how are we going to reconcile millions of Protestants who are married pastors? Are we going to force them to put away their wives? I think not. I think that's excessive. Like if we have we've had massive conversions like the Anglican Ordinariate. We've had corporate conversion. That's one of the biggest conversions of Protestants to the Catholic faith corporately. So we have an entire denomination of Anglicans, and there are also Lutherans involved. They all have married pastors. So are we going to force them to be celibate? I think that's excessive. We think we should just welcome them in, integrate them, and that's what the church has done. However, the other factor is we do know that there are enemies of Christ, enemies of the Catholic Church, who are bishops, who are trying to push married priests in order to undermine clerical celibacy and push women deacons and female ordination and all this stuff. So they're trying to mechanize this whole thing into their own agenda. So we should know about that as well. So we shouldn't be just, I think, on a case by case basis. I think it's totally legitimate to integrate married priesthood, like married pastors who are Protestants corporately. But I think that the discipline of clerical celibacy should be stalwart. Now, on the other hand, there's another factor, and that is the problem of homosexuality in the clergy. So obviously when you reconcile married pastors, you get a bunch of heterosexual men in the priesthood, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different factors. The other thing is that celibate priesthood is objectively superior to a married priesthood because a celibate man can pray more. A celibate man is, living the life of the angels. Yeah. And so it's just objectively superior. And so there's a lot of different factors there. So I think in general, it should be any sort of allowance for a married priesthood in the West should be extremely cautious because we know that the enemies of Christ are trying to use that. But I mean, I just think that integrating the corporate married pastors is okay. That's my take. Do you guys have any opinions on that?
I think it's bang on to say that the custom is the force of law. Like, because if I'm not mistaken, the Eastern priests, they have to abstain for 24 hours before they celebrate Mass. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you talk to Ortho bros, and daily Mass is not common unless they happen to have a pastor who's not, because they can be, like, a lot of time they will enter as a celibate, because I know that archpriests and bishops and so forth have to be celibate. So there is a recognition in the East that there is a superiority to the life, the illuminative path you can get onto, obviously, if you're not married. There is merit in changing diapers and things like that, but it is not a time of contemplative meditation, that's for sure. And also, I think, like, if in some parallel universe, if I were a priest, I mean, I don't even know how we would go to Mass as a family. I'd have to like have my wife go to Mass with me somewhere later in a different parish or something, so they can fulfill their Sunday obligation. And I would have to be there without them, because I don't know. I just don't know how you'd have your little kids in the pews and things like that. And that's why it's partly custom. Like, if you live in a traditional culture with this is the norm, and you have multi-generational living and grandparents are living with you and stuff, it actually makes a lot of sense that you have a little parish church in the village or whatever. It actually makes a lot of sense you could do something like that, because the village raises a child sort of thing. It's like daddy's up there being a priest, and you're sitting with grandpa and mommy and aunt so and so and whatever, and like that would actually help the mom who's just had a baby. Like, I mean, there's lots of things, because of course you'd be open to life, you'd hopefully be following the rules of the church, and but then also, you mentioned the aspect of homosexuality. Part of the issue is that so I've been thinking about this for a while, where I think that the 1917 Code of Canon Law, although was very useful in some ways, I think it opened up a Pandora's box of a lot of ways to use it in wrong ways. Because before 1917, there wasn't this established universal code for all places and all cases, because there were customs that were ancient all over the place that they would deal with things differently. One of the things that was good, though, in the 1917 code was this strong condemnation for sexual sin. Hey, Jake. was the strong condemnation for sexual sin in the old code. The new code doesn't have the same thing. And with that, the norms of like, you know, seminary entrance and religious orders. So in a lot of religious orders that are traditionally minded or traditional in practice, they're very strict about knowing if you have the gift of celibacy or not. And they're very practical. It's like, have you had no sexual impurities for at least 3 years? Things like that. That's hugely important. You know, if somebody's like that and they enter, you know, the SSPX or something like that, it's like, oh, I mean, you got through adolescence and you're good. You know, like you went through that period with this world and you were fine. I mean, there's a very good chance. And then they live in community and different settings, which, you know, make sure that you're in a certain way. And yeah, Andrea here says it's really important to stress that celibacy is a manly virtue, of course, and that's it's self-control epitomized, right? I mean, there's nothing more tempting on earth than to not be celibate.
Say yeah, Saint Joseph.
Yeah, exactly. So I think to put it this way, the custom has to be there. It would be so strange to make like married priests at the Novus Ordo diocese parish or whatever. It just would make no sense. It would flip everything on its head. It would stop their ability to do lots of their ministry. You'd have to stop daily mass, basically.
It would undermine the whole financial system, because now you gotta support a priest and his wife and children. There's a ton more finances there now suddenly.
Yeah.
Missionary
work.
I think that like the Protestant pastors have somewhat of an established custom, and that's why right. I think that's like a legitimate integration of a married priesthood there.
I mean, I literally know priests like that, Timothy, and hey, Jake, Anglican priests that have hesitated because, you know, they say, well, okay, I go to Rome, you know, and what happens to my family? Literally, that question is like that the Catholic Church doesn't have a retirement plan for married clergy. I mean, they, at least in the Western Rite, for us, Latin Rite is, and I know this, you know, they just shove him to like retirement homes and that's it. You know, most priests, and nobody knows how they end. I actually know one of those guys who we helped often and all of that. But it's like, if you're single and celibate, that's one thing. But if you have dependents, that's a whole different deal. The celibacy, I'm a whole 100% with Timothy. One thing I would like to add or clarify is, as long as one of the main reasons that we're not using or, you know, imposing this as a solution and as a solution to the homosexual problem, because like I always fought against that notion and saying like, well, if the only people, you know, have married priests, they won't have abuse. It's not, hold on, you know, abuse is abuse, and it's a distorted view of sexuality, and marriage is not a cure for that. I'm like, you know, get your head straight before, you know, that's not a proper way to see relationships, let alone a sacrament.
I would just, abuse happens within families, sadly, at a high rate. Relatively speaking, it's very low, thankfully, but relatively speaking, it's probably higher than the priesthood. So, historic. So that you're exactly right.
Yeah, like we're not adding like, okay, it's like throwing money to a problem. We're just gonna have some married people, that way we're not having abuse. Well, if you think that way, you have a distorted view of sexuality, marriage, and obviously the sacraments and all that. So that's not a solution. But like, again, like Timothy says, is you just got to keep a broad scope, and it's helpful. I do see it that if that were to happen in the church, at least in the Western Rite for us, it will be more a pastoral solution, honestly, than any other or pastoral contribution, because you have men like us, obviously, that we know what it's like to raise a family. We know the challenges that come with children and loss and just, you know, daily lives. So it will definitely could be beneficial for the men in the community, because you have there's an ordinary, speaking of the ordinary, there's an ordinary church literally a few blocks away from my house. And the priest there is married. He's actually like grandpa now. He's just, you know, so you have this very, you know, he came from Lutheranism, I think, I don't know where, like this huge Midwestern German looking guy with a long beard, manly man, you know, so it's just like a Viking with a robe essentially. And that to a lot of guys speaks. I mean, I got along great with him, and not that I respect him more than my spiritual director, which is a celibate guy. It's just different. There's a different kind of connection there. So that could potentially be very helpful for fathers and men from a pastoral point of view. I don't know, from a theological point of view.
Yeah.
So, Jake, we were talking about a few reasons that we appreciate Pope Francis, because on this feast day, this is a feast day that he's instituted that I appreciate, and one of the things that came up was his reversal of Pius X's abolition of ordaining married men in the Eastern Rite in the United States. So do you have any thoughts, any appreciative notes on Pope Francis and his pontificate?
Well, I came in at a weird time, didn't I? And I apologize for being so late. My alarm went off at 4:10, and I instinctively hit the little snooze button, and then next thing you know, it's 5:30, and I'm like, oh. So forgive me, gentlemen. But Pope Francis, let's see. I appreciate the fact that he just will say what he thinks is important. Right. Now, I don't necessarily always like the content, because if I'm being perfectly honest, some of this stuff requires me to think. And I think that's a lot of the problem. There's I'm going to have to try. This didn't sound exactly like what Pius XII said. That must be wrong. That's a temptation. And we have to avoid that temptation by thinking it through. What did he say? What did he actually mean? What was the context, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the man just speaks from his heart. I really do think that. And for that reason, I appreciate him. Also, he does say a lot of really good things, right? Catholic stuff. Like, what was the one recently? Oh, something about if you prefer, if you have pets and you prefer them over children, like that's wrong. That is morally wrong. It was something like that. He's talked about hell quite a bit. He's talked about loving your neighbor. Even, I'll throw this out there. Even his initial, wasn't exactly his first encyclical, because his first one was technically co-written with Benedict. He sort of finished Benedict's project with Lumen Fide, but his second one, his first solo, Laudato Si, that is full of good Catholic social teaching, and it challenges especially Western minds, So anyway, I don't want to just ramble on about all the ways I appreciate Pope Francis, but there's two of them. I think he speaks from the heart, and I think he says good things regarding Catholic social teaching.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my controversial comment number 2. Was as a Michiganders love. We love our state. Pure Michigan is the marketing slogan of Michigan, because we have such natural beauty in Michigan, which we zealously preserve. We're the only state of the union, this is my knowledge, that has a 10-cent redeeming of your pop cans. So to prevent litter, and that's been for like 30 years in Michigan. Wow. So Michiganders love our natural world, and we want to keep it that way. And we want to stop developments. We want to keep the natural, our state parks and national parks free from developments and free from pollution. We want to camp there and go there. So I really appreciate some of the things that Pope Francis did say in Laudato Si. I haven't read the whole thing. It's like 200 pages, but I read, there's a video that we did with Meaning of Catholic. It's called Catholic Environmentalism with Thomas Stork. And if you don't know Thomas Stork, he is hardcore Catholic social teaching, has been for years, decades. But we did, there's a book that he did called Glory of the Cosmos. And I've always, as a Michigander, I've always grown up loving the natural world and just sort of sympathizing with some aspects of sort of an environmentalism mindset, which is just basically, we are gardeners here on Earth. That's what man's job is.
Right.
He's appointed as the gardener to preserve and keep this garden and grow it and preserve it and do it according to the natural laws of this environment, including the way that we build our own communities and our own houses and everything. Like this, you can see this in places like Italy, where you have a whole community that's integrated into the hillside and everything. But in the United States, unfortunately, there's been a strong mentality of sort of destroying, just sort of submitting the natural world to our just bulldozer, basically, so that it hasn't been a harmony with the world. But the problem is that this whole this whole effort, which I think is very Christian and very fundamental, gets mixed up with these globalist elites who want to push environmentalism, to push birth control and population control, because they mechanize that whole thing. And that's the weakness of Pope Francis, I think, is like Luis was saying, like, you know, he kind of buddies with all these guys, brings them to the Vatican, appoints Jeffrey Sachs to some pontifical university, whatever. So that's obviously the weakness and the problem, but I think a lot of the things that are in that encyclical are really, really good. And Thomas Stork brings that out. He's a chapter in this book, which is a commentary on Laudato Si, and it's really great, I think. So I do appreciate Pope Francis for that coming.
Yeah, could you imagine, like, he's big on identifying the issues with like the commercial materialist society, especially in the West. Again, could you imagine? I mean, we all live within driving distance of a large city, and as you're driving, if you didn't see any billboards, if you didn't see any neon signs, if you didn't see just row after row of franchise business, how much more pleasant might it be if it was family-owned business here with a modest, you know, handmade wooden sign like cobbler, barber? I mean, just what a more pleasant environment that it would be in. You know what I mean? So I'm a little nostalgic for something that never was and probably never will be. But I have to imagine that this is what Francis has in mind when he's calling me back to a more natural mode of life. He's not saying don't use technology. I mean, look at us right now. But I didn't plaster the front of my house with the big Meaning of Catholic logo either. You know, and Sam, I don't intend to. So, but you can get the point. I think when we take all of it as a whole, what he's trying to say, is in this one document, that is, about our stewardship and what would a life that's post-consumerist look like. And it might be really beautiful.
Excellent. Any final thoughts, any gentlemen?
We got to give the trads a bone here. There's some Gnosticism in Laudato Si, let's be honest. Especially his argument for pro-life is actually sort of a bottom-up. It's like human beings are the apex of evolution sort of thing, and therefore we're special, so we shouldn't be aborted. So there is, I know what we're saying here, but we can't go too rose-colored glasses, because we're going to get some, like, there's some problems in Laudato Si. One of them, well, for example, do you guys use air conditioning?
Yes, I do.
I'm in Texas.
Well, Francis says not to use air conditioning, boys. So I'm more of an environmentalist because we have radiators, we don't have forced air. I will say one of the great, to give credit to the United States, one of the great things that I think the U.S. has given the world is infrastructure for strong conservationism, which I think is the proper term to look at, through hunting, for example. And that's actually saving, like the African wildlife preserves. Everyone gets mad at these people hunting these giraffes and stuff. They're old giraffes who can't procreate, and they're dangerous. They're giraffes, and they're basically euthanizing them the way you put an animal down. But they just cost you $80,000 to buy the giraffe or whatever, which funds the nature preserve or whatever it is. That's one of the things that I think, on the one hand, America has a consumer. Of course, there's a consumerism. I get that. But one thing that America's done really well, I mean, the national park idea is kind of an American thing, you know, which is unique throughout the world. And you guys know me, I'm basically libertarian in my economics and stuff. But from a cultural perspective, there must have been something organic in the American people that they would have embraced. On the one hand, you can blow up mountains and make highways through mountains and things like that, which is kind of very impressive. But on the other hand, it's just a given that you would, quarter off massive chunks of land for the people to enjoy in perpetuity. So there is something there. Anyway, I'm gonna have to run though, because this kid, I need to change his diaper. It's disgusting.
Yeah. You need to enter into contemplation.
Exactly. All right, boys.
All right. Well, let's offer up an Our Father. Yeah. I mean, we're not trying to whitewash Pope Francis' pontificate. We're just simply trying to, present a few other points to be consideration. I mean, as I'm trying to say, like, every pontificate has a mixture. I mean, it's just hard to be a pope. So, or you could have a bad pope who's not very pious or whatever. I don't know. So, but I appreciate y'all's thoughts. Let's offer up a Hail Mary.
Hey, Tim, very
Luis.
quickly.
Oh, go ahead.
If 5 minutes, since we're going to pray Hail Mary, will you guys add our hometown, Monterrey, Mexico? Right now, they're going through an extreme drought. They're rationing water from 4 a.m. to 10 a.m. That's it. You know, we're talking about a 5 point, like more than 5 million people metro area in northern Mexico. When I was a little kid, just quick side note, we had rationing, you know, but it was because we had a steel factory and all that. Not even when I was a kid, where the rationing is so extreme, and it ended up like being normal. But I don't know why they brought back that rationing. So there's a big drought. So if you can add my hometown to your prayers, I will deeply appreciate it. Speaking of environmentalism, you know, we have the same weather as Texas, but in Texas we have plenty of water. In Monterey we don't. So anyway, there's that.
All right. Well, yeah, let's pray for Monterey, Mexico. Let's offer up a Hail Mary for them. Luis, can you pray the second half?
Yeah.
In nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Jesus.
Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostre. Amen.
Our Lady of Victory.
Pray for us.
Saint Joseph, terror of demons.
Pray for us.
Saint Anthony of the Desert.
Pray for us.
Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Ruega por nosotros.
In nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Jesus is King.